Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As most of you are aware of, the slogan for this year's International Biodiversity Day celebration is Building a Shared Future for All Life. And the IBD, which fell on last Sunday, 22nd of May, was celebrated in many parts of the world in the past week or so. The decade 2021 to 2030, which has been declared by the United Nations as the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, is said to be a global rallying cry to heal our planet, aimed at preventing, halting, and reversing the degradation of ecosystems worldwide. Last year, we discussed how we can be a part of the solution while the whole world was grappling with the situation created by COVID-19 pandemic. This year, while the pandemic situation has somewhat eased with the development of vaccines and effective administration of immunization programs, we in Sri Lanka are facing the worst ever political and economic crisis faced by the nation. In the situation where the people's lifestyles have turned upside down, with having to spend a large portion of the day in queues and the cost of essentials is skyrocketing, who can afford to pay attention to biodiversity conservation? When the government has no fuel to distribute to the people to come to work and has to tell the people to stay at home, not even to work from home because the power supply cannot be maintained, how can the government spend on conservation and environmental monitoring activities? Can the private sector be motivated to carry on these activities? Even street cleansing, when the transportation and power supply cannot be provided. These are some of the issues that need to be addressed if we are to build a shared future for humans and all living beings. In the situation where the economic crisis is deepening by the day, with no sustainable solution in sight, we at IEPSL discussed the importance of bringing together a group of resource persons to discuss some ideas on how we could at least attempt to look at biodiversity conservation in the background of our deepening economic crisis. So on behalf of the Institute of Environmental Professionals, Sri Lanka, let me warmly welcome all of you to this webinar on Whither Biodiversity in a Deepening Economic Crisis, where we have lined up a group of eminent personalities in Sri Lanka ready to give us an insight into how we can attempt to move forward in building a shared future in the current context. IEPSL is a relatively young institute, and I feel it is my duty to say a few words about us, as I know there are some participants who are not members of our institute yet. IEPSL is the umbrella organization of environmental professionals in the country, and it was established in 2006 through a cabinet decision. The institute was formed to fill the much needed gap of having no professional institute for the practicing environmentalists to work together to uphold the dignity and raise the reputation of the environmental profession in the country. We are a group of professionals of varying disciplines. We have biologists, physicists, chemists, engineers, architects, town planners, agriculturalists, technologists, accountants, lawyers, social scientists, and many other professionals working in the government and private sectors, with some of us actually freelancing, with the common thread among all of us being the commitment to environmental conservation and sustainable development. The Institute is committed to extending professionalism and its services to the country at large for the benefit of the public. IEPSL was incorporated by an Act of Parliament, Act number 1 of 2020, in February 2020, thanks to the unwavering efforts of the past presidents, council members, and officials in various government sector institutions. We have an active membership of about 400, which includes about 100 chartered environmental professionals who have proven their competence and commitment towards environmental protection and sustainability while performing their duties in their own professions. All our members must abide by the Code of Ethics, which expects us to conduct our professional lives and activities in an ethical manner, exhibit the highest standards of honesty and integrity, be dedicated to the protection, conservation, and sound management of natural resources, and perform under a standard of professional behavior that conforms to the highest principles of ethical conduct. Please do visit our website, IEPSL.lk, to learn more about IEPSL and what we do, and do become a member if you think you would like to work with us and make a positive contribution to our environment. I'm so thankful to our panel of experts, Professor Devaka Weerakoon, Senior Professor, Department of Zoology and Environmental Sciences, University of Colombo, Mr. Anushka Wijesinha, Chief Economist, Chambers of Commerce, and co-founder of the Center for Smart Future, and Ms. Vositha Wijenayake, Executive Director, SLYCAN Trust, for agreeing to be resource persons at our webinar. We were in fact planning to get Dr. Eric Wickramanayake, Director of Wildlife and Wetlands at WWF Hong Kong, but unfortunately, I think timing was not in favor of getting him today. And of course, our moderator for the panel discussion is none other than our President-elect, Mrs. Shiranee Yasaratne, who I'm sure needs no introduction in the biodiversity circles. Thank you very much, Shiranee, for volunteering to be the moderator and putting together a wonderful team of panel members. Let me also take this opportunity to thank my able team of council members, Honorary Secretary Ajit Atugala, Editor Dr. Sampath Mahala, Assistant Editor Mr. Trishan Pereira, and the Executive Secretary, Savintri, who attended to all the details of organizing this seminar. And I even right now working in the background, making sure that the webinar will go on without any glitches. I hope all of you who are joining us will actively participate in the discussion, and all of us will have a wonderful experience this evening. Thank you. Over to you, Shiranee.
Thank you very much, President, for that introduction. And I think you already informed the participants or our audience that we have organized this event to commemorate the International Day for Biological Diversity, which falls every year on the 22nd of May, and this was just last week. Since biodiversity is such an important subject, and of course, if you really look at it, it is the very basis of survival, we thought we couldn't let the day pass without having some discussion on biodiversity, where it's going, and also the problems that Sri Lanka is facing, as the President very aptly pointed out. When there are economic issues in the country, it becomes very difficult for conservationists and biodiversity experts to really bring in the subject to the discussion table. So we thought it was our duty to invite a few panelists that we thought would bring some meat into this discussion around the table and have a discussion, a conversation on how best we could deal with this problem. So I'm very pleased to have this a very eminent panel of experts. We have Professor Devaka Weerakoon. In the biodiversity circles, Devaka doesn't really need an introduction, but just for the record, he is a senior professor at the University of Colombo. And he's a professor in zoology and environmental science. He has contributed immensely to the national biodiversity agenda. He's been in almost all the policy formulations in the country, and he's in the forefront of Sri Lanka's efforts at conserving the biodiversity that is so precious to us. So thank you, Devaka, for joining us. And can we have your camera on, please?
It is on. I don't know what's.
Well, for us, it is not. No, it's not. Okay, now.
Yeah.
Then we also have Anushka Wijesinha. Anushka, sorry if the president mentioned that you were the chief economist of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. That was previously where Anushka's past. He was a past chief economist of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. He is an economist of repute with a lot of international experience. He specializes in international trade, investment, and economic competitiveness. He also serves on several boards in financial services companies in Sri Lanka and is the co-founder of the Center for Smart Futures in Asia. It's an Asia-centric think tank that takes an interdisciplinary and solutions-oriented approach to solving public policy challenges. So we are very happy to have you on board, Anushka. We also thought it would be very nice to have Vositha Wijenayake with us. She is also very active in the environmental biodiversity field in the country. She's the founder and executive director of SLYCAN Trust, which is and she's an attorney at law with a LLM in public and international law from the University of College London. And also, she has over a decade of experience in working on climate change at national and international levels and has contributed immensely to on-the-ground efforts at biodiversity conservation. So I think we have a nice group here, and it would be a very nice discussion that we are hoping to have. So since we are celebrating biodiversity, and we must let our viewers or observers or audience know what is it that we are talking about, I would like Devaka to come out and let us know what is biodiversity, Devaka, and why are we so anxious to protect it? You're muted, Devaka, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Shiranee. I would just share my screen because I want to point out a few things. But to start off with your question, what is biodiversity? It basically refers to the diversity within living things. That is, if you take any given species like human beings, we all have a common form and structure, but yet we are different because we carry different genes. So the greater that diversity, the greater is our ability to withstand environmental change. So that is one level of diversity. But we don't live alone in this planet. We share this planet with estimated number of about 13 million other species of plants, animals, microorganisms. That is the second level of diversity. That is the diversity of living beings that inhabit this planet. And these living beings do not live on their own. They interact with each other, and they also interact with the non-living world. Constantly, we have to breathe all the time. So I'm interacting with the atmosphere. We drink water, which is a non-living thing. So to meet our life's requirements, we have to interact with the non-living world. So living and non-living interactions between the living beings as well as the living and the non-living in a given time and space is called an ecosystem. And there are so many different types of ecosystems. So that is the third level of diversity. So what we're talking about is the diversity of life in this planet. Although we are dividing it to three levels just for the ease of explaining, we are basically referring to the immense diversity that exists in terms of biophysical systems, among living organisms and within. But the reason why we are so concerned about it is because we are living in an unprecedented time where biodiversity is disappearing at a rapid rate. The graph I'm showing you is a diagram that has been developed to define what is the what are the boundaries? I mean, this planet has limited resources, and but we are changing many of these parameters because of human activities. But what are the boundaries within which we have to operate? So they have identified number of planetary boundaries with respect to climate, with respect to biodiversity, etc. What I would like to point out is if you look at this piece of the pie, which indicates the biodiversity loss and how does that compare with the expected planetary boundary, we can see already we have exceeded the planetary boundary in terms of biodiversity loss. So this is the crisis we are facing. This is what is referred to as the biodiversity crisis, because we live in a time where the loss of living species is nearly 1,000 times greater than the usual rate at which species disappear in this planet. Because what we also have to understand is any species that appear on the planet will eventually become extinct. But all living organisms have a certain lifespan. But we live in a period where we are going through a mass extinction. Things are disappearing much rapidly than they are appearing, which is what is the reason why we are so bothered about it. But also why biodiversity is important is because there's a very strong relationship between biodiversity and us. If you're only thinking in a people-centric manner, because living organisms have a certain hierarchical order, starting from atoms all the way up to individuals, they grow populations, communities, and ecosystems, and so on. So if we know that if we look into this part of the picture, if one of these things don't work, let's say if we have a problem with our heart or kidney, then the person becomes sick. Likewise, when you look at the ecosystem, it is also made out of number of different components. So if we lose species which are playing an important role in an ecosystem, it's like, maybe having a problem with your kidney. So the ecosystem will not be able to function properly. So as we talk about our health, we also talk about health of the ecosystems. In other words, what we are talking about is that the ecosystems can function at their most optimal level. So when species disappear, then the ecosystem will begin to uh, develop difficulty to exist, and therefore they will not be able to provide the important services and goods that we depend on. So to give you a few examples, just to show you the nexus between biodiversity and our own health. Now, this is a classic case where, I mean, if you take a river, if you have a forest in the river catchment, when rainfall uh, falls in this area, the forest will capture the rainfall, store it, and slowly release it. So the river will have a continuous flow over a long period of time. And if you remove this forest, all the water that falls will come down the river, and it will result in floods. And floods will have an impact on people, direct impact in terms of mortality and morbidity, and also indirect impact in terms of communicable diseases and so on. We also depend on natural enemies for agriculture, like to control plant pests, to pollinate our crops. Now we see a global decline in pollinators, in natural pests, and as a consequence, our ability to produce food has gone down. So our food security is affected. When the food security is affected, human nutrition is affected, and in turn, it will have an impact on us. And this is again a case closer to us. We are living in Colombo, and if you look at some of our waterways, this is what it looks like, because we have been disposing our garbage into these systems. We are not treating these ecosystems properly. And when you destroy the quality of the water, it will also kill most of the species that live in it, especially predators like dragonflies, who controls vectors like mosquitoes. So when we throw our garbage into the stream, uh, that is flowing behind our house, we destroy the quality of it, and that destroys the predators, and that will promote the spread of vector-borne diseases. So what we sow, uh, we reap. This if we do not understand this nexus, then this is why we do these things. So to answer, I think I gave a very long answer to your question. Biodiversity is very important because we are part of it and we depend very heavily on it. And if we do not take care of it, it would eventually have a significant impact on us.
Thank you, Devaka. That was a good introduction. Now, we all know that we live in a biodiversity hotspot. We have many ecosystems. We know also that biodiversity in decline. You just said that species are disappearing. And even in our own country, we see this happening. Now, in this deepening economic crisis that we are in, what do you think will be the most severe impacts that we will be able to see in the near future?
Yeah,
with crises, with all these, energy problems, where, for example, treatment plants might not be able to, function. Then the patrolling officials from the Department of Wildlife may not be able to go out there in the field and check on poaching and, whatever is happening, illegal logging, for example. These things can, exacerbate. So what is your opinion as a lead biodiversity expert, and we being a professional institute that can, take a dialogue forward with maybe the powers that be on subjects on this important subject?
Yeah, I think what we are facing is not only an economic crisis because of our poor decisions. I think what we should be bothered more about is the food security issue that is looming on the horizon because of the organic fertilizer decision that we've taken in last April. Now the results are coming up. In the last Maha season, the production has gone down by as much as 50%. The fertilizer is still not here. So this cropping season has just started, which is also likely to fail. And some farmers are not even engaging in it, which means the next Maha, they will not have enough money, even if the fertilizer is there to start planting. So most of the agriculture experts in this country are putting out the red flag and saying that we are in for some serious trouble within the next 6, 8, 10 months. Now, in that backdrop, it will have an impact on biodiversity. On one hand, a direct impact where this will lead to poverty, and poverty leads to heavy dependence on natural resources because that is a very well proven linkage. And we have seen during the corona pandemic, we have seen leopard deaths going up. Actually, if you look at what was happening, they were not killing leopards, but they were setting out more snares to catch other animals, and the leopards were a bycatch. And since when a leopard gets caught, it becomes noticed. And that's how we begin to understand the gravity of the problem. Now, compared to COVID situation, what is in store for us in the future? I hope these predictions are wrong. But when they made these predictions about the organic fertilizer, even though we wanted to believe that was not true, now the results are out. So I have a gut feeling what these people are predicting is likely to happen because it's based on long years of experience and science. So this is a very bad situation. So there will be heavy dependence on resources, more hunting, more illegal logging. So managing biodiversity is going to be is not going to be a priority. And at the same time, in order to solve the energy crisis, we will try to develop renewable energy resources of this country very rapidly. Renewable energy resources, while it is useful, and that is the way we should be going, if we approach this in an unplanned manner, the fallback is going to be, the impacts are going to be very heavy, because if we don't do the necessary investigation applications and take the necessary mitigations to reduce the impacts, and instead try to fast track it, we're probably going to be generating energy, but at a very high cost. Now, what we also have to understand is even though we are talking about need to develop, now also on the other hand, we're talking about Waga Sangram to as a response to this impending famine. Now, that will involve more clearing of more forest or more natural areas for cultivation. Again, we are already, I think, last 2 years ago, we had an issue with this, what is referred to as residual forests. These are all very important forests, but the government released them for development. So this is the sort of pervasive approaches that might happen in the future, which doesn't look very good for biodiversity. But what we must also remember is that biodiversity is our way, provides us a way out. Because at the same time, I think there is now dialogue going on about debt for nature. Can we offset some of our debt in lieu of conserving our biodiversity? Biodiversity accruals is now again very hot these days. I know you have been a pioneer in developing this idea.
We'll come to those instruments, Devaka.
So those are
but we thank you. So I think that really puts the sort of focus on Anushka, and I would like very much to find out from you, Anushka, in assessing this declining status of biodiversity. And we heard Devaka talk about the serious impacts that we will have to look at in the future. Do you think that there are any sustainable financing options, as a way forward, Anushka?
Thank you very much, Shiranee, and it's a real pleasure to join all of you. Some of my remarks will flow nicely from Professor Devaka's remarks, and we hope we can go back to him also to hear some of his thoughts on these. I think my starting point as an economist, and I'm not a biodiversity or environmental professional. I'm happy that economics perspective was invited at this forum. I think we should all be concerned that following the immediate economic stabilization and recovery efforts, that the tendency is likely to be to follow a sort of slash and burn type of economic growth with a ruthless focus on trying to get back to the status quo, right? And make up for lost time in terms of our Sri Lanka's economic growth. And that type of economic growth would be one that damages the environment, reverses years and years of hard work in the conservation space, and focuses on trying to build back rather than building forward with a focus on nature. We have an opportunity to not go down that route, right? And we have an opportunity to use newer instruments, plenty of which exist today. But I just want to make a small deviation before I get to what some of those opportunities are, to just say that a starting point for to tap into some of these new financial instruments is a recognition that nature has value. And I don't think that whether it's at the macro level from a national accounts point of view or at an enterprise level, we have that. So at a national accounts level, I mean, we need to go beyond GDP, to start exploring newer and more holistic ways of accounting that considers nature and natural capital. For instance, there's already some work being done by the UN Statistics Office globally called the System of Environmental Economic Accounting. And these are not way out there. They do follow a similar structure as the system of national accounts, which most countries already use for their regular national accounts. And also moving from that macro picture to micro, there are also examples of how countries are linking economic recovery and stimulus measures to biodiversity improvement. So for example, during the COVID economic fallout, some countries crafted their stimulus packages to link short-term economic recovery to longer-term environmental goals, including the protection of biodiversity. For example, Pakistan had a massive indigenous tree planting program. It was a national reforestation effort, and it was like a large public works program, public safety net program. But it was not your typical public works where you tell people the government pays for roads to be built and you create economic activity through that to support incomes and create jobs. But instead, it was linked to an environmental objective. So I think we need to think innovative like this, because there simply won't be the fiscal space in the next 2 to 3 years to do things how we have done before. Budgets in ministries and agencies that have a role in conservation will be affected by the austerity measures. So that's another point I just want to make. So first point is about needing to value nature better, both at the national macro level as well as at the enterprise level, and we can talk about the enterprise level later. The second is I don't think we can wait for the economy to get better to then have resources get freed up to then do the good things on the environment. Knowing that the resources are going to be constrained, we're going to have to find ways to link the two. For example, linking economic recovery measures or stimulus measures to environmental goals. In that linking, I think on the financing side, I'll speak about a couple of sovereign instruments we can look at. Two key sovereign instruments would be of interest to Sri Lanka. One is the one I think that many of us have heard of, debt for nature swaps, and the other is called nature performance bonds. Nature performance bonds are relatively, I think, newer in parlance. They were put forward by this Finance for Biodiversity initiative. It links the coupon and principal repayments with success in protecting or enhancing a country's natural capital. Pakistan was due to issue one last year, I think one of the first in South Asia, but it hasn't yet happened. It's a long process. And under this, some nature-based KPIs are met through positive incentivizing. So it downscales the coupon and principal payments depending on the outcome on the environmental side, and ecosystem restoration targets, etc. But these have to be very rigorously monitored, reported, and verified. So nature performance bonds allow for both restructuring of existing debt as well as issuing new debt. Debt for nature swaps typically are used to restructure existing higher cost debt for lower cost debt linked to some kind of conservation target. And debt for nature swaps are probably a little more established because of its relative simplicity. And I think the more recent examples would be Belize and Seychelles. So Seychelles in 2016, a US $20 million sovereign debt was restructured at a discount in exchange for marine conservation and climate pledges. Belize, I think I'll spend a little bit of time because it's something I've also been looking at to understand how it would play out here. So in Belize, a subsidiary of the Nature Conservancy, TNC, lent funds to Belize to buy back one of Belize's existing $500 million, what they called a super bond. That was an existing, plain vanilla typical bond. And it was discounted at 55 cents to the dollar. Now, this was financed by issuing a new blue bond. I think the sale was arranged by Credit Suisse, a global bank, and underwritten by the International Development Finance Corporation of the US, which provided insurance. And what this meant was that this loan had a lower interest rate, 10-year grace period, no principal paid, long maturity of nearly 20 years. So that's a very, very favorable instrument compared to your usual commercial loan. And it was linked to, of course, marine reef conservation and so on. Now, one of the takeaways I have, and I'm still really looking at the implementability in Sri Lanka, is that anyone who thinks that these are easy things out there just because the money is available, the instruments are well known, that it's easy for Sri Lanka to just do it. Oh, we have a debt problem, let's do a debt for nature swap. We need to issue new debt, let's do a nature performance bond. It's not as easy, and folks in the economics and finance world have to recognize that, these are not easier, easier things that we can do a little bit of a sham job on the environment and get this new money. I think we have to work with environmental professionals because if there's one thing this current crisis has taught us is that Sri Lanka has a poor track record of managing sovereign debt. We take on debt, which is like an adult thing to do, but we have reckless teenager type behavior and don't spend that money well, and we don't have the financial discipline. So while these instruments do exist globally, while the pots of money do exist, for Sri Lanka to tap into it, the big question I have is whether we have the discipline and the institutional framework to do what is needed in order to stick to those commitments. Because cautionary note, and I'll end on this, most of the time, these sustainability linked kind of bonds have clauses where if we don't meet the conservation goal or natural resource management target, the interest rate for the instrument gets kicked up to a commercial rate. You don't get that discounted rate. So it means that we could be taking on new debt thinking that it's environmentally linked, but we fail to do what's needed as the clauses for that. And at the end of at the maturity period, we realize we have to pay the commercial rate, which could have been the rate we get even from a typical Wall Street lender. So I think that's where the instruments exist. Countries have done it. It is an option available, but our track record for any form of sovereign debt has been poor. So we need the discipline, and that is not your usual financial discipline. It is also an environmental conservation discipline. So our two worlds have to really work together on it. I'll stop there.
So Anushka, how do you bring about that or bridge that gap between economists and perhaps environmentalists? I mean, how do you sort of see it going forward?
Yeah, I think this is
being positive,
Yeah, I think this is a big question. It's something that I've been also thinking through. The first thing that needs to happen is that in the government institutions that are typically in charge of issuing and managing debt, that is at the central bank and at the treasury, they need to be talking to their own colleagues in government who are in the conservation space, whether it is DWC or Ministry of Environment or wherever, so that the groups that will be tasked typically with the debt side of things and the sovereign instruments understand that if we want to tap into these sustainability linked or environmentally linked bonds, we have to understand the environment, because those folks are not in that world, whereas these folks are. And in that, they can't only talk to government, they have to talk to environmental professionals outside of government in, environmental foundation and so on. So I think the first step is really the folks typically in charge of the plain vanilla debt responsibility, understanding what this is. Otherwise, they will go off and try to raise new money or restructure new money on that, leaving behind, the reality on the ground with the environment. The others also needs to happen where the folks in the environmental space have to understand how some of these sovereign instruments work. So for example, at the Center for a Smart Future, we have this new Natural Capital Forum, and that's one of the things we're trying to do to bridge this knowledge gap. Otherwise, we won't really get anywhere. And I think perhaps, I need to find out more, but perhaps one of the reasons why it's taking time in Pakistan is because this gap was not bridged sufficiently. So Shiranee, on your question, I think first step is to bridge the awareness gap on both sides, that they understand each other's worlds. And the second would be that if such a instrument is being issued, we probably have to think of a new institutional structure for it. The existing typical treasury approach or central bank approach on one hand, and the typical structure for marine conservation or for environmental in the environmental or DWC kind of work may not work. We may need to look at a special purpose vehicle where we have the best of the both worlds coming in to kind of manage this this type of new instrument.
I heard, Anushka, that the Prime Minister has been calling for proposals, for budget proposals. I wonder whether this is one area that some institution can propose, that such an institution or some sort of assessments are done as to how to take this forward, because obviously this is an area that Sri Lanka can benefit from.
Yes, I think, I mean, we can all team up to try and put some proposal like that, because the timing is right. My concern is that we might stumble into this direction, assuming that it's an easier instrument and it's a panacea for our debt problems, when it's not. It's actually, you need a not just financial discipline here, you also need the discipline on meeting the conservation goals. And we all know how problematic it's been to get even the existing marine conservation or other conservation targets being met. So this is probably even more involving than your usual sovereign instruments, because you have two types of discipline required. So in the spirit of Sri Lanka not just stumbling into these new instruments and thinking it's easier than the other instruments, we can definitely collaborate to put some proposals to the budget.
Thank you. Devaka, I think we have some food for thought in what Anushka was saying. And we as scientists and environmental professionals have a role to play, because we have also failed, I think, in systematic ecosystem conservation, and even our own National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan at the end of 2022, I don't really think we have much to boast of. So, and even, you know, the ecological damage that we faced with this Express Pearl disaster, I mean, you know, we really couldn't do much, you know, to sort of say that. So what is your opinion of what, as a sort of very senior, you know, biodiversity expert, how do you see this link between economists and ecologists?
I see a very positive outcome for two reasons. One is we've been battling with government to conserve our species, our ecosystems in a very, it was a losing battle in many ways. You've been in that battle for many years. We've had our victories, but I think we have more defeats. So this, I think, this instrument, the way Anushka explained, is not just a wishy-washy thing. We have to make certain commitments, and we can maybe use these instruments to force government to do the right thing. So that is one positive side I see. The second thing is we've been talking about the value of our biodiversity in terms of environmental economic terms. We say it's trillions of dollars worth, but we don't have anything to show practically what is the value. Now, let's say there was a discussion the other day about Nature Conservancy being interested in swapping $2 billion, and they are trying to work out the modalities. It may take a long time, like Anushka said, but supposing if we pull it off, that shows the value of biodiversity in real monetary terms. So we have an opportunity for the first time to show biodiversity really pays. There is a reason why we should be conserving. So I see these two-pronged advantages. One is holding our governments to be more responsible in terms of doing the right thing, because we've been developing so many instruments. We have developed NBSAP. We spend endless hours developing policy documents, plans, which are not being implemented. Nobody takes them seriously. But maybe this is our opportunity to mainstream some of these and to really make them do what is needed to be done. But like Anushka said, it's a very long road. But as I think that would be our contribution as environmentalists. That will give us the ability to go beyond what we've been doing and try to do something very positive for this country. So those are the two things I think I would take away from it. Plus, we've been talking about a lot of these now when we were developing the JEP7 proposal. We've been talking about biodiversity accruals, and you and I have been trying to work out these biodiversity accruals, but we had no way of knowing how to monetize it. But now I think we have an opportunity to monetize some of these things, to really put it into practice and to bring the necessary policy changes in the government, because the Treasury will never take us seriously if we just walk to them and present our idea about biodiversity approval on a few years ago. But today, they're forced to think about it. So I think I look at this as an opportunity to bring different kind of change.
Actually, Anushka, just for your information and also our audience here, we have been having a pilot plot in Panellists Conservation Forest, which we have been working on. Devaka has been our chief scientist for the last 4 years. And we started off by looking at the baseline, and it was a degraded forest area, which was very high in biodiversity long years ago. And because of chain or cultivation and other things, it lost its biodiversity value. So we've been restoring it and monitoring it, quarter by quarter to see whether the endemic species, the threatened species come in. And now we're trying to get an international accreditation body to tell us how to calculate the biodiversity credits that accrue. And it's all private sector funded. So you see, if we have a few good examples like that, we may be able to walk into these, government, the treasury side of people, like you said, who don't understand much about the ecology side of things. We need to take them some figures, some examples of things that have actually happened, and not talk about things which are all over in the air. So these are things that we are hoping will accrue and give us some, and Devaka, I know, is also working on a payment for ecosystem services project with the renewable energy sector, where we are looking at waterfalls generating renewable energy and getting the private sector to pay for the ecosystem service that is giving them the water, because they just get it free of charge. So these are some sort of things that we have been working on, and hopefully we'll be able to bring those to the table if we have some discussions with officials on these sorts of things. I now would like to take this to Vositha. Vositha, I just, I know that you are somebody who has worked a lot in the ground level. You work with communities. Your SLYCAN Trust is working extensively with mangrove ecosystems. We know that they are very, very high in value, especially where carbon credits are concerned. Can you tell us now, with biodiversity declining and ecosystem services declining, communities as sometimes they act as defenders of the environment. How are they affected by this whole thing, and how do you see that from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Shiranee, and very interesting points from Professor Devaka and Anushka. Just a bit on what we do. So SLYCAN Trust is a think tank. We work with the communities, but it's directed as a research component or a study that we would take the information and promote policy interventions. So the mangrove conservation work we've been doing, it's very connected to the community, but it also has a livelihood component and also sustainable development as part of it. So while we would like to say that all the time the communities are defenders, it's not necessarily always the case, because they could be also encroaching and damaging the environment as well. So it has to be striking a balance in creating awareness among communities to ensure that this does not happen, as well as making sure that their rights and their livelihoods and also livelihoods and also the economic empowerment is assured with the environment being protected. So it's definitely something that's a struggle most of the time. And given the country context, the livelihoods being threatened, that creates an additional burden on those who are doing conservation efforts to ensure that this takes place in an equitable manner, so that the communities also benefit while the environment is protected. So some of the work that we are doing on mangroves would connect with, for example, pollution control, where the conservation effort would be connected to pollution control, and then the community would have a livelihood, and that is like economic diversification component. So they're interested in working on environmental conservation because they have a livelihood linked to it. Similarly, ecotourism, mangrove-based tourism, capacity building of communities to engage in this. So there's a big component on how entrepreneurship empowerment could happen. And it's through some of this work that we decided to initiate Ethical X, which is having a component on entrepreneurship, empowering of communities in understanding what livelihood options would like for them if they were to conserve the environment. So I cannot necessarily say how on the ground certain communities are impacted if they were to take action on environment conservation, because we have not encountered a situation in any of our sites in this way, because most of the communities work with us and we work with different actors like the government as well as the private sector in the implementation of these efforts. And what we are looking at are multi-actor partnerships to ensure that the community benefits from the effort, while there could be examples on how policy and projects could be scaled up building on this. But linking to what Anushka and Prof. Devaka both were saying, it's important to identify how communities are integrated into these processes in a way that is not a token value thing, but actually for benefits being allocated to them. Because I know there are a lot of projects when we have to apply for them, we have a component of community engagement. Sometimes the efforts are duplicated. You see in some sites, the same thing happening multiple times, and that's money wasted. So the investments actually being assessed, the impact of what you're investing being assessed properly, how the benefits have been distributed among the community, setting up governance systems that would facilitate subnational levels. For example, it could be ground nil division, divisional level, or district secretariats, having all these elements encompassed in the actions that we do, so that communities can make decisions with financial literacy as well as skills that would empower them to make decisions on their own is vital, not necessarily just a component saying, okay, 50,000 people are benefited, but then there's no impact assessment as to how this happens. So it's important, I think, we take these into account when we are looking at finance for development as well as addressing the crisis. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in this crisis, these economic, issues that we are facing, do you think these communities can play a watchdog role?
Yeah, I think in any situation they could. I think that's important. That's something we wanted to set up in the mangrove sites that we were conserving. Obviously, COVID became an issue, so there are certain factors that were pulling back a lot of conservation efforts with inclusive and participatory processes in the last 2 years. But I feel yes, definitely, and also they could be playing a money component where documenting could happen, setting up mechanisms where they could have a phone where they would assess the progress or the growth of these plants or any other biodiversity component that we're looking at. So it could be like a crowdsourced system of monitoring and evaluation, and also keeping them included in the process, because they have an active role, and then that would contribute to making sure they're present throughout the process of conservation. So that would be one option. Plus, I feel like that whole coexistence aspect, right? Looking at how the environment conservation, economic growth, plus rights of the individuals who live around could be like something we look at in the planning processes in a more, I think, serious manner than we do at the moment, than just words that we say. Taking into account, I think, the economic component, because most of the time, like what Anushka also mentioned, there are different elements like, say, risk transfer options that we look at if it's climate resilience linked to biodiversity conservation. There's not a lot of understanding on this. We've been working on this, and there are different sectors we work on, and how insurance and other options could play a role in ensuring that conservation is linked to financial instruments as well. Even human-elephant conflict situation, there are countries that look at this and address conservation plus human element in a way that is financially viable. So looking at these innovative options would be a way to move forward as well, I feel.
So are there any kind of, projects that you're working on that is helping to illustrate some of these points that you brought up?
Yeah, so we have a project that we've been working on that's on climate and disaster risk transfer and finance. And that looks at, for example, the crop insurance, and that has a component on human-elephant conflict and human-animal conflict. So if you talk to the farmers, there's not a lot of understanding how this works. So there's a gap in how the community understands the process and how the implementers would understand this. And so we're looking at CDRFI instruments and creating capacity building among communities, as well as collecting data to understand how this could be enhanced. So that's something we'll be working on the next 3 years as well, linked to tourism as well. So which is having a component on biodiversity conservation. So there's a lot of opportunity to work with other actors here. Professor Devaka worked with us a bit on some of the policy work that we were doing as well on climate policy and how biodiversity connects. So how different actors could work together in looking at opportunities to access finance. And just coming back to what Anushka said on the green bonds and the blue bonds. So they're looking at this in the angle of climate resilience as well. So not just looking at biodiversity framework, but also linking climate into the process of how we access money, because innovative finance is a component that we look at as well. So looking at all this together and creating policy interventions that would be inclusive and participatory would be important, I think.
I think collecting some of these examples, would be really important to us, because these are new ways in which we can, connect the two, and getting more people to understand the value of this sort of work is important. So I think you should continue to do so, and keep records of whatever you're doing and disseminate that as much as possible to a wider group, because sometimes people don't really understand when you say blue bond or green bond, people don't really know what is meant. Anushka, can I ask you to kindly simplify it for us, green bonds and blue bonds? Because many people don't really, understand what it means.
Yes, can't really simplify, but I think in essence, green bonds typically are land related, and blue bonds typically linked to
Ocean.
So it's all these are all typically linked to some achievement of some environmental outcomes. And green bonds are typically those on land, and blue bonds are typically those related to oceans, water, depending on the country's circumstances. But I think what's interesting is that green bonds perhaps have been around a little longer, and it's now also not just a sovereign instrument, but it's also being used by business, private sector also raising money, because under this big bucket of green, quote unquote, green bonds, I think a lot of instruments are put in. Sustainability linked loans is another umbrella. So that's how I would put it, I guess.
Any audience questions? We can, if you have anything to ask our panelists, please either put it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and ask any questions from these panelists that we have here. Does the audience have any questions which we would like to ask? I can't see any. Is there anyone who would like to speak up? Yeah. Hemanti, can you speak up?
Yes, I just want to, because we are also, still to know about these green bonds and blue bonds and how it works. So Anushka, if you can just elaborate the process as to how we could tap them, that would be very much appreciated.
Sure, and a small disclaimer here, I'm not an expert in green and blue bonds. Like I said, it's an area that as an economist and someone in financial services, we are also looking at these new instruments. So that has been how I've come into it, because we are seeing it as an option for both sovereign, as a sovereign instrument, but also as an instrument that the private sector could tap into. Small clarification, what I mentioned earlier, green bonds tend to be a larger umbrella, where it is, typically anything to do with green quote unquote green environment, sustainability tends to be bucketed into this idea of green bonds, sometimes not just on land, by the way, right? So, but blue bonds are very clearly for things relating to water and oceans. Sometimes blue bond as an instrument is also put under this large umbrella of green bonds. So how it works is very much dependent on who is issuing the instrument, where the financing is coming from. Because, for example, for any bond, there is the who is taking on that instrument, who is taking on the debt. It could be a country, or it could be a company or a bank, let's say. And on the other hand, you have the people who are putting money behind that bond. So, for example, to draw parallel with typical international sovereign bond, which now everyone is talking about, the kind of things Sri Lanka has to repay or has currently halted. It is Sri Lanka is the sovereign that is taking on the debt, and the investors is not just one person, multiple hedge funds, pension funds, whole bunch of investors on Wall Street, in Hong Kong, in London, whole bunch of them. So in the instance of a green bond or a blue bond also, it may be on the lender side, it may be one institution or it may be many. So I think in the Belize example and even in some other examples, it is multiple investors with a green mindset, who want green credentials, who put in money to these bonds, and then you have someone who issues them and underwrites them. Typically, if it's a poor credit rated country, you have an underwriting that's done, like in the Belize example, the underwriting was done by the US corporation in order to make it credit worthy. So for Sri Lanka, that's one big consideration, that we are currently in more or less default category. So we are not credit worthy even for a green bond, blue bond, nature performance bond, whatever. So whatever bond we try to take on will need for it to be underwritten, insured by another entity. So I think Vositha might be able to explain more on this, but typically what you have is also one more thing, these have to be linked to achievement of some natural resource management goal or conservation goal. And again, that depends on who is lending. Some lenders want it linked to some general metrics on conservation. Some lenders have a particular interest in, say, forest cover target. Others will have a specific interest in some coral reef or marine sanctuary, a specific one. Let's say Sri Lanka issues a blue bond with conservation targets for Kayankerney Marine Sanctuary, or it could be for multiple marine sanctuaries or multiple marine protection areas around the country. How many are designated? That may be the KPI. So it really depends. There is no one way of structuring it. It depends on who the lenders and their interests, and also the intermediary. In Belize's case, the intermediary was TNC. Vositha has a comment.
Vositha, maybe you can add to this.
Yes, just a quick thing on the safeguards aspect. I think, thank you, Anushka. Just because when it comes to a lot of investors, we've been approached by some countries in the Pacific, not the countries, but investors who are interested in doing mangrove projects in the Pacific, saying they have this much of money and they want to invest to create finance mechanisms like bonds and whatnot. So those investors, we might, in the context of whether we accept money from certain entities or not, in the sense of conservation agendas of what we prioritize, might be something we need to look at as well, because there's also that polluter pays principle that comes in. If that's the case, how does this work and how that gets integrated, or whether it's like a cross-off of what we do as pollution or emissions that it comes in. So that's something I feel like any instrument that we're looking at as a country, we would also need to look at in the investors. I'm not sure whether this works in the context of how we are at the moment in the crisis situation, but it's also very important to think about it while we are accepting funds and how that would work. And also on the underwriting aspects, I think this goes across even for CDRFI as a requirement, and how this could happen for Sri Lanka, not necessarily just for the biodiversity aspect, but also these crop insurance schemes and all. I think that's a technical expertise that the country, at least from what we've seen, is looking at and needing more capacity building or even options for underwriters in the country. I don't know whether this is the case of what Anushka has been looking at, but in our research, we've seen that this is something most of developing countries have a need for, and also having access to this sort of information and capacity would scale up our efforts across the board on accessing finance. Yes, Anushka, sorry.
No, I mean, I just piggybacking on something Vositha said about insurance. So the underwriting and insurance I referred to was underwriting of the bond, so at the sovereign level. But Vositha's point is also very valid in terms of insurance that's related to climate-related risks, climate insurance, agri-insurance. I think the good news that all of us need to bear in mind is that as a relative latecomer to all of this, we have the benefit of so many frameworks being out there for us to utilize. For example, even on insurance, I think the World Bank and some others put together a toolkit for insurers to consider climate-related risks, biodiversity-related risks, upgrade the capacity of insurance companies in countries. So that exists. Then on the corporate side, we have the task force on climate-related disclosures. So at CSF, we worked with the Climate Disclosure Standards Board in the UK to bring the climate disclosure reporting standards to Sri Lanka, and it was implemented by the Colombo Stock Exchange. Now, that's not a framework that we had to develop from scratch. It comes from the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosure. Many countries and experts have formulated that, and now it has moved even to a draft Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So all of these means that as a relative latecomer, Sri Lanka has the opportunity to look at what's already out there and see what can be adopted, and not start afresh, but instead build on from the knowledge that's already there, and not feel like we don't know where to start.
Just 30 seconds, Anushka, just a quick one, not to go against what you're saying about the frameworks, but I think we also need to validate the fact that Sri Lanka is one of the pioneers in having a crop insurance in the world, potentially the first in the developing countries, because it's been there, I think, for the last 70 years. So looking at how we can build this into something more viable, because most of the money goes from the national budget into this, which is not viable, right, in the sense of how we are at the moment. So one is we need to brand what we have in the country, the initiatives that we've had for so long. Because when we go into processes and panels and speak about this, a lot of countries are interested in knowing more about it and learning from Sri Lanka. So what we've done, right and wrong, we need to speak, and also using this as a mechanism to access money for the country, finance for the country, because this has been there for the longest time. We've somehow managed to give out money to people as compensation. So how can this be introduced to different sectors with frameworks that are out there, like you mentioned, but also looking at different investors to scale it up to different sectors, or maybe biodiversity conservation as well. So I think one thing we need to look at is how can our success stories in the country are spread in a way that the narrative is that we can do things and come and invest in the country to do these things. So I think that should be something we should work on if we want to get positive funding.
Yeah, sure. Anushka, I think there's a question for you. Professor Niranjani, would you like to speak up?
Yeah, thank you, Shiranee. Just something that came to my mind, which I'm sure is not really hopefully is not something that happens, but just to be cautious, have you heard of any potential risks of stealing our biodiversity products or natural resources that may result from our getting into this kind of funding? Because, why it came to my mind is because you would have seen in the news that yesterday, I think in India, while they are genuinely helping us, there was this talk about what's that, Kachatu island. They want Kachatu back, so things like that. I mean, we are, of course, at the moment at a very, we are like beggars can't be choosers situation right now, but should we be cautious? And what kind of situations should we be cautious about?
Would you prefer if Devaka answers that, or would you go for it?
I think happy to pass over to Professor Weerakoon to have a question, but I think the one comment I would make is, since it was addressed to me, in terms of the instruments, sovereign debt instruments, there should be little concern about us losing, say biopiracy or any theft like that, because at least in terms of those sovereign instruments, nobody is coming here to take anything, and we're not sending anything. It's simply Sri Lanka committing to certain targets and goals. If we don't, and that being independently monitored and verified, if we don't meet it, we don't get that lower coupon, discounted coupon and principal.
Yeah, that was very clear. Thank you very much, Anushka. That was very clearly explained in your speech. I'm asking about some other things. What you said was very clear, that it's our own responsibility to make sure that we look after our environment, and they are giving us soft loans to carry out those. I mean, that's wonderful. But you are also cautioning that we are not in a position right now to be creditworthy enough, probably. So we'll have to be backed up by some others. That was very clear, and that's something that I learned. Thank you very much for that. Having understood that, I'm just asking for other scenarios.
Devaka, would you like to come in?
Yes, I would like to reverberate what Anushka said with respect to debt swapping or biodiversity accruals. Nobody is going to come and do anything here. It is the onus is upon us to do what is required as a state, and also whoever officers were involved in it. But what Professor Niranjani was alluding to was something different. It is we taking loans from nations like India and China, who may have vested interest behind what they are lending to us. That has nothing to do with this. These are completely different things.
Two different things. Yeah.
I would agree with what Anushka said. There's a very little risk involved here. The only risk I am seeing is our government not living up to their expectations. That is the only risk that I would see at this point in time.
I can see a question from Dr. Nishanti. Nishanti, would you like to speak up?
Yes, thank you, Shiranee. This is Yasaratne. The thing is, I mean, as Professor Devaka explained, food security is the main issue here. So, I mean, today in social media, there were two incidents. One in Bundara, where illegal fishing and the park officials were, I mean, they were attacked by some people. And then again in Rakava, turtle was killed to get its eggs. So there will be more incidents like this happening in the future. And I mean, how can we mitigate these incidents?
I think I should give a response to that. No, so I think it's going to be a difficult one, especially at this point of time where everybody, there seems to be a bit of lawlessness happening in country, people taking matters onto their hands, which is a very, very dangerous situation. But let's say we manage to resolve that issue and bring back some sanity to the situation, where I think there is two-pronged approach. Of course, on one side, I think even when you look at the illegal hunting issue, one issue is lack of enforcement, which again has number of underlying reasons. The Department of Wildlife Conservation is short-staffed, so they are not in a position to police each and every place in an effective manner. But that has to be done. I think at this point of time, most of the conservationists see that that is not happening as we would like to see. But in a scenario where fuel is very difficult to get, we will have a lot of people giving excuses as to why not this is happening. So
that's why communities also need to play a role.
Have to be in.
Yeah.
So I think we'll have to work with communities. That's where the non-governmental organizations will now have to step up their activities and try to
yes. And in all these apps that are being produced and, for illegal activities. Yeah. Now I know that Anushka has to leave at 6:25. Anushka, I just wanted to ask you now, we are a professional environmental institute, and have you got a message for us from your point of view on what we discussed?
Actually, I think the message I would bring from my own profession is that we would very much like to work more closely with this, and that's the objective of the Natural Capital Forum, to bring our profession, which tends to be quite insular, quite to ourselves, the economics and finance professionals world, closer with the environmental professionals, and let's make that happen. And I guess the message or humble request would be, please talk to us, even though we may not talk the same language all the time. I think now is the time to get on the same page. And the other would be message would be, I think this is a unique moment in our economic history and our economic trajectory, and it'll all be all about engagement in order to get our point across. All of us care about the same thing. Not everybody in government, in the treasury, in the finance and debt world, at the macro level, may understand us, or maybe may think the same way we do. I think the onus is more on us to take that to them and get them to understand. We can either try and do a slash and burn to just try and recover and go back to how we were and be happy with that, or we can do it very differently and use this transformationally, not thinking that, okay, let's environment, we put it aside, let's get back to it once we have the money. I am really worried that that will be the attitude that everyone takes. If we can push back on that attitude and show real examples. So for example, even on the potential areas for nature linked performance linked bonds or debt for native swaps, I think the environmental community and we can work together to identify some feasible sites. Because of the complexity in doing it, I think doing one manageable, small enough, one marine protected area being shortlisted by a whole bunch of environmental organizations collectively, Blue Resources Trust, IEPSL, identify one that we can start and tell the government, here, we think this is a great candidate. It may not be a 500 million bond you can do. Let's start with 100 million or something like that. And let's do it and get the practice of doing it, so that over the next 10 years, we can do many more with that practice.
Wonderful, Anushka, and we look forward to working with your Center for Smart Futures so that we can move this forward, and we have these discussions to stimulate us and our membership on how to set about doing these things. And we had hardcore ecologists, hardcore economists, so now we realize that we have to come together. And I think that's a really wonderful message from you. So since you have to leave, I just want to say thank you so much, Anushka, for joining us. And
thank you. I'm sorry I have to leave early, but I think I really believe in collaborating with people who are truly in this space and have done work for much longer, SLYCAN Trust included. and treat us as a conduit to that other world that tends not to understand that language. So thank you.
Niranjani,
Shirani, give me half a minute to thank
Yes.
Anushka.
Yes,
It was
sure,
wonderful having you, Anushka. This is something that is not very commonly heard by us. And we really look forward to working with you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Anyway, I just thought, now this whole discussion that Nishanti, brought up, Vositha, it's important now. This, even our own membership has been saying that very soon we won't have the state patrolling and, doing all these things. So what is your view on getting community engagement, in this little space that we have to take care of what we have, I mean, is it really practical and can it happen?
Yeah, I mean, independently of what we are facing at the moment, there was some concerns.
I mean, in this instance, we know that our wildlife departments, our forest departments won't be able to be doing what, so there won't be state funding for, patrolling, monitoring and evaluation. These things will, be very difficult in the future. So I think it's up to us, as Anushka also said, the NGOs and others to step up and, be there if we are to protect what little we have. Is there any message you'd like to give and in its practicality, I mean?
Yeah, so what I was going to say was, even before the crisis started, there were some conversations we had with the wildlife department, where the project actually, from them, it was a suggestion that the community gets engaged. One, in the conservation effort, and then also monitoring and evaluation. So what the funds they were like envisaging as a need was actually quite low, somewhere like $10,000 per site, just to initiate the process and interlinking with tourism and generating livelihoods. So models like that could be applied, leave aside tourism, how it works, that's supposed to be discussed going forward in the country. But I think those are things that can be integrated into our proposals and look at how community would be included so that they don't need to go and attack the biodiversity to earn a living or to address their food security. So if they have a component to play in the projects itself, I think it would be easier to convince them that we need to protect the biodiversity. And getting into how different actors could work together, including the government. I think something that SLYCAN Trust does is we always have multiple stakeholders involved in the projects. And we try to have even the private sector as a component, their engagement in an effective way. But ensuring that all projects have these multiple actors involved and identifying their role in what can happen could be a way to go forward, because we work in silos, most of us, and not having, okay, we work as a civil society organization or we work as a government project, but these are all projects that benefit the country as a whole. So unless there's a specific focus of capacity building for different entities, I think it could be very easily amended that projects involve everyone and there's a component that each one has to play. So I don't think it's impossible. It's just a matter of planning ahead and designing projects that could benefit all parties and meet the goals that we want to achieve.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to add to this meeting?
I mean, thank you very much. It's great to be part of the discussion. And I think it's a very interesting conversation, and we look forward to engaging, because this conversation has started a while back, but in different silos. So bringing everyone together and seeing how everyone can play a role, especially given the time, because personally for me, not as SLYCAN Trust, but I feel this is an opportunity to change track.
Sure.
And engage different actors, because everyone is willing to listen at the moment than they were before. So make the best out of it and make sure that the frameworks are inclusive, participatory, accountable, integrating these into the processes and working together would be the way forward. So thank you for the conversation and look forward to
Thank you so much for joining us. And we really enjoyed and continue doing what you do. And if you're not a member of IEPSL, please do join us. Thank you so much. Devaka, Is there anything that you would like to add as your last, comments?
Yeah, I would like to echo what
Considering, of course, what Anushka said, and how we can engage more in this sort of dialogue, because talking straight ecology is no more, Devaka, like we used to.
But like Vositha said, I can see an opportunity also to try and push some of the ideas that we have been talking about, which has not been received too well at times where we didn't had a crisis. Also, I think developing, converting people. Now, the issue that we are the worry that Nishanti had is in the current crisis, will it drive people to destroy natural resources more? But I've also seen a good example is Eco Park in Habrana. When they started, people who worked there came in bicycles. Today, some of them even have cars. So we can create livelihoods that will positively help the nature, and nature in turn will help them. So they will look at nature in a different way. We've been talking about this a lot. You would remember that we done a entire survey about less traveled places in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
So that tourism is centralized into few places, but we have so much to offer. So these are opportunities where we can maybe promote SLTDA to look beyond what they're doing now and try to maybe diversify their thing. So provide better livelihoods to local communities and try to maybe make them guardians of nature rather than destroyers. So I see in a crisis always looks bad, but I think there are opportunities, and if we are prepared, we should be able to capitalize on them. But thank you so much. This has been a very interesting conversation. I would like to thank you and the other two panelists. It was always a pleasure to have this discussion.
And Devaka, I know that you are already engaged in some discussions with UNDP on the debt for nature swaps. And we are looking forward to the Japan project that is looking at new financial options. And I think it will be a trailblazer for Sri Lanka. So continue doing the work. And I think we are in the right direction in that. So thank you so much. Professor Niranjani, would you like to add your thanks to Devaka? And
yes, of course. Thank you very much, Devaka. And also Vositha. It's the first time that I'm hearing you. It was indeed a great pleasure to hear what you're doing, and please do continue to work with us. Shiranee, I think we have our work cut out now.
Yes, we do.
We can't stop here. We really can't stop here. At least
our work is always cut out, as you know. And I think what Janaka Wijesinha was saying is now very true.
Yeah, I mean, this is so great, actually. That I wasn't too sure how this is going to be, but I'm now convinced. It's a shame that we don't have a good audience. I think we should bring this up to the, give publicity through our website, and then also.
And also we have recorded this, so we can play it on our website.
This should go to the media, because there's a lot that came out of this discussion.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us, the audience in particular. I suppose with short notice, a lot of our members were unable to attend, but let us continue this dialogue. As the president said, we have our work cut out for us. We can't hide under the little doormats and places like that. We need to now come out strongly and openly and do what we have to do. The Prime Minister is calling for proposals for assistance. So I think we should be there, and help in whatever way we can. And I think, as Vositha very clearly said, we have to be accountable and transparent as the messages that are going out are quite obvious. So thank you very much. And we, from IEPSL, it was a great honor to have you all. And we really look forward to working with you in the future. So do keep in touch with us, and we love to hear of your case studies, your good examples of things that, anything that you would like us to take forward. We have something like 300-400 members, and wide diversity in them. So anything you would like to sort of bring up, I think there is somebody in the membership who will be able to give a good, piece of advice. So thank you so much. Would you like to close, Niranjani, or you would?
Yes, thank you very much to the panelists. It has been a great pleasure for all of us, and very useful discussion. And to the audience, and also our technical backup and the council members, thank you very much. It's been a lovely evening.